So it's such a pleasure to be here with you, Cheryl, interviewing today for the Women's Forum of New York, Women in Business Wednesday. You're such a fixture in journalism. I don't think there's a single person in New York who doesn't know who you are and isn't impressed with the 30 years of journalism that you've been contributing to the world, not just New York. You have so many accolades. So I've tried to pull a few things just to make sure that I honor you in an appropriate way. As I mentioned, you've been a journalist for over 30 years. You've been an anchor on New York One, as well as the Emmy-nominated Broadcast Live at 10 weeknights. You are also the talk show host of the weekly public affairs program In Focus with Cheryl Wills, where you interview the most powerful newsmakers and celebrities in the country. Adding to this incredible list of accomplishments, you're also the author of a series of books that honor your family's transition from slavery to freedom in the United States. I recently read, get the cover correct, the book Die Free. And that's how we connected, because I also have two ancestors, two great uncles who fought in the Civil War. And you have the story of your great grandfather, Sandy Wills, who emancipated himself and joined the United States Colored Troops of America and fought in the Civil War. So you just have this incredible personal story, but also the story of your family that is interesting. And we're going to talk about that today in our interview. Just a little bit about myself. I am the author of, I will be this summer, 9 historical novels. And I do have a Civil War book coming out called The Thread Collectors this summer, which is inspired by my own family's roots. And that I collaborated with a Black author friend of mine, Shauna Edwards, so that is something that connects us together, not just with the wonderful Women's Forum of New York. But let's get started today in asking you some questions and sharing your responses so that all the women in the forum can learn a little bit more about you. What was the moment you knew you'd found your calling as a journalist, or your sense of purpose in your career? Is there something that stands out in your memory?
Yeah, so Alyson, let me first thank you for that wonderful introduction. This is the Mutual Admiration Society here. I'm a big fan of your body of work, as well as a best-selling author around the world. Congratulations on your latest book. I'm excited to read it. Your stellar credentials just blow me away. And I'm so glad we're friends, and I'm so glad we were brought together by the Women's Forum, because we are truly kindred spirits.
We are. I felt that. And even like we're both wearing pink.
It was not planned, everyone.
No, not at all.
This was not planned. So it's an honor to be, I really want to switch roles with you and interview you, because that's what I do, because you are fascinating in yourself. Maybe we'll get the opportunity to do that down the road. But to answer your question, what inspired me, right? You're asking to find my ancestor. What was it like? It was transformative. And I'm sure I'd like to know the same for you. I didn't grow up knowing. I don't know if you did, Alyson. I didn't grow up knowing that I had an ancestor who fought in the Civil War. I was completely miseducated about the Civil War. The African American narrative was completely left out, which is remarkable, because in historians' view, the Civil War was about slavery.
And also, as we know, over 180,000 Black men enlisted to fight for freedom, and a great risk and peril to themselves to make this journey. It's incredible that it's been erased from history.
Erased from history. I went K through 12 in New York City, Alyson, and not a word. And that just, it's something that cuts me so deeply. If I could be transparent about it, how could I be sitting in schools, including Syracuse University, and not learn this? And
You know,
not
it's not even just about the Civil War Black soldiers that have been erased from history. I was reading today about the 761st Infantry of World War II, the Black troops who liberated Dachau and Buchenwald, and nobody knows their story.
wiped out.
And they and that, I mean, I want to somehow be able to put that in a book someday, because it's so important. The more times people mention it over and over, the repetition of sharing history, so that it does become pressed in our mind and our hearts to remember those who served and did take these incredible risks to their own lives and their families to join up and to try and do the right thing.
Absolutely. And for Black men up until through World War II, you know, who risked all for a country that literally stamped them second-class citizens. The Nazis during you mentioned World War II, they were given more rights than Black American soldiers. That's proven time and time again. So it's painful, it's hard to digest, but as a journalist and as a writer, you can, I'm sure, relate that it is important to digest it and to share it with people so they understand that these stories cannot be buried forever. And that's the beauty of being a writer and a journalist. We dig out the truth.
Absolutely.
The truth cannot be buried permanently.
Right.
And that's what I feel I've done by discovering the legacy of my great-great-great-grandfather, Sandy Wills. Let me just tell you a little bit about him. Again, I'm Cheryl Wills, proud member of the forum. And my grandfather was purchased at age 10 by Edmund Wills. And as was customary during the 19th century and during slavery, when someone bought you, you also took on their surname. So, Alyson, I am the first person in my family to draw that connection, to understand why we are the Willses. We've been carrying this name for generations. From the moment Edmund Wills purchased my grandfather in 1850, that name has been with us. And I draw a straight line and I know every name. And it's an, incredible honor to finally be able to say to this generation, here's why we're the Willses. It's incredibly empowering. And my grandfather escaped the Wills plantation, as you said. Thank you for reading my book, by the way, and emancipated himself and joined the United States Colored Troops shortly after Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And he served honorably and was honorably discharged in 1866. So this is a story I share. In addition to the book you have, I also have written, I'm sure we'll get to it, a number of children's books. And that's my way of righting the wrong of me not knowing about this as a child.
Yes, and I think I'm personally very fascinated with this sort of evolution of your career. And as you mentioned, your discovery of your ancestry with Sandy is something that you learned later in life. Yet you began your life 30 years ago as a journalist, where you were propelled to sort of and really advocating to illuminate and elucidate the stories of today's unsung heroes. I mean, that's what I think of you and New York One, is that you pull these stories that are happening around us that none of us know about, and you illuminate them, and you make sure they're not forgotten, and you call attention to themselves, and you honor them. And yet later on in your life, you realize this incredible, courageous past of your ancestor that's been forgotten, where there's no memorial. You don't even know where he's buried, and how that shapes you and merges with who you have had this parallel life as a career woman and as the anchor woman, and yet you draw strength from it and keep on going. To me, that's so beautiful to see that as your narrative, that you're drawing strength from him, that you're trying to also, in your everyday life, you're illuminating these unsung heroes, but you're also reflecting on your own life. You're thinking about your own father in Die Free and his journey, and had he known what you now know about Sandy Wills, how it reads so unjust, right, that he didn't know, and that you learned this late, but yet you're taking steps now to go into schools and to share your story and to let not just Black children but all children know about the service that these Black troops have done. To me, it just fills my heart. So I just, I know we're going to talk a lot about you as a journalist, but I think it's important to sort of pay tribute to how you have always tried to honor legacy.
Absolutely.
Not just your own.
And thank you so much for saying that, because this really is sparked by my dad. My dad died prematurely, and he was killed in a motorcycle accident on the Williamsburg Bridge, and I was 13 years old. And I was like, who is this man? I barely knew him, because he was a busy firefighter, and he was the first in the family to go to college.
And he was a Vietnam vet.
His grave says Vietnam in Calverton National Cemetery. He didn't physically go into Southeast Asia, but he did, to break it down, you don't just join the army and go to Vietnam. You go in stages to different areas, and he was at the last area before shipping out to Vietnam, and he was up for renewal, as for lack of a bit, I don't know the specific term,
Yeah.
but he was supposed to re-up, let's say, and he decided, I'm done. I did my 3 years, and everyone was begging him to not re-up.
Right, of course.
Because my mom wanted to get married. My grandmother was like, we're seeing things on the news. You shouldn't go. Don't go. My father was a paratrooper. He was actually itching to go. And so he did not. But he still qualifies as a Vietnam veteran. And indeed, his grave says Vietnam at Calverton National Cemetery. So when he left us so abruptly, without warning, of course, my 13-year-old mind, Alyson, said, who are we?
Right.
And when I opened his funeral program and saw he was born in Brownsville, Tennessee, I knew my dad for 13 years, and he didn't say a word about it. And I was inquisitive as a kid, asking everyone, because, I was like, why? And I was born in 66. I'm 55. So my young mind, Alyson, said, why do people not like us? And, I would see on a broadcast colored only and protests and give us rights. And my young mind was like, well, what happened? Like, why are people treating us like this? And, I realized all corners of my family, maternally and paternally, came from the South, and they were part of the Great Migration and came to New York City, which is why I'm a New Yorker. But I didn't understand, like, why did you guys run out? You clearly are not native New Yorkers. I was, but they weren't. And no one fully explained to me, like, the background. So that stayed with me. And of course, once we had the tragedy, I really wanted to know why, who, where, when, what. And
but this shows your soul as a journalist was always with you. You were always curious. You always wanted to know.
I'm not faking it up.
No, I have proof.
Yeah.
You were always that person.
I am.
And good for you that you found a career where you could flourish using that natural curiosity, that intellect, and that desire to illuminate.
The natural curiosity is authentic from childhood.
So that's incredible. Now, do you have any mentors early on in your career that helped and inspired you to become the woman that you are today, the journalist that you are today?
Sure. One of my favorite mentors is a man named Philip O'Brien. He's the one that opened doors for me at New York One. He was the one that, when I started, I'm an original New York One staff member. So that means I was there during our launch in summer of 1992. This is our 30th anniversary. Yeah. So he was an incredible mentor to me, teaching me the ropes. I'm always grateful to him. And, several other people, Bill McCreary, who was at Fox 5, the late Bill McCreary, he recently passed away. He was the first African-American anchor in New York City. And when I met him, anchors in my life, in my view, were like, oh my gosh.
I mean, it's so true, because we always, sat down and
there is plays in your memory, and he had been on when I was a child, and to meet him, I was just like, wow. So he mentored me as well. So, they really taught me that this is a tough business, but it's not for the faint of heart. And that proved to be true. And I am very proud that I have persisted Nevertheless, I too persisted. And, it's an honor to have a primetime broadcast on New York One. And as New York One has evolved, so have I. And to have the talk show as well in focus, where I get to interview incredible people, it's an honor.
No, you are amazing. That's why I'm here interviewing you. Well, do you have, what do you think has been the most rewarding experience being a journalist to this day? I mean, is there any story that in particular that you covered that stands out in high relief for you? I'm sure the forum members would love to hear about, something that to this day, really stands out for you that you covered as a journalist.
Sure. And the forum is connected to this. They have wonderful programming. And about 6 or 7 years ago, the forum was invited to tour what was called the Freedom Tower, and now it's called One World Trade Center. And I dropped everything and went, and we got a tour while it was yet under construction. The entire building was in place. It was erected, but we got to go to the top. And I mean, there were no walls even.
Oh my goodness.
Just the shell of it. And that was incredible. We got to see the museum before it was finished, and it was just incredible. And that, of course, is connected to my coverage of 9/11. I think that, and being the daughter of a firefighter and knowing that 343 firefighters were lost that day, as well as many others, of course. But the coverage and my experience down at the World Trade Center on 9/11 and the days and years that followed, and I don't have the words to describe. I don't think there are any words to describe what that meant to me. I went on school trips in the 70s to the World Trade Center. Never could have imagined that we would be alive and not seeing those twin towers. And tragically, the story continues because first responders continue to die from 9/11 related illnesses. And this, of course, last year was the 20th anniversary. And I don't want to say the pleasure, the horror of interviewing first responders who are still dying.
And I think this is also connected to what we discussed in the beginning, which is that there are certain stories that people don't want to hear, they want to forget, and it's our duty to honor these people who served and who have suffered and need to be recognized and to bring these stories to light. And you constantly do that, and I think that is so important.
Exactly right. And so the coverage of 9/11, I don't think any of us reporters who were down there at Ground Zero thought 20 years later we would still be talking about how this single terrorist act would kill people 20 years plus down the line. And so I have been an advocate, and I'm not ashamed to say, Alyson, journalists are supposed to be impartial, but the older I get, the more I refuse with certain stories to be impartial, and 9/11 is one of them. Take away my press pass and lock me in a box if you need to, but I will not pretend on behalf of all of these innocent souls that this was not an incredibly catastrophic event that continues to kill. And one thing I realize when I'm interviewing them, they're like, everyone forgot us. Everyone forgot us. They said never forget, but everyone's forgotten. Everyone wants to move on, and we can't move on. And I always amplify their message and in a way advocate for them because we can't let the city forget. And, that story, and also the coverage of George Floyd, I'm so sorry, but I am not going to sit on the air or anywhere else and pretend, a police officer weighed his knee into the neck of a man.
And it was an accident. No.
And, that was just so sickening. It was like watching a lynching in real time. And as a mother of a 24-year-old Black man, I refuse to say, well, police say, and well, we're not sure. No, we're sure. We're sure. And there are certain things in life, as journalists, where you have to say, you know what? We're taking politics out of this. This was an atrocity, just like 9/11. I'm not going to pretend, oh, are we sure you got sick from this?
Right.
I mean, there's a point where you just have to say, you know what? And I know that not everyone may agree with that, and that's fine, but I have to live with myself.
Well, I know for me personally, that moment in history was when I picked up the phone and called my friend Shauna Edwards, who said, we've been talking about writing this book for 10 years and we need to write this now.
Yeah.
You know, I have in my family's history 2 great uncles, which I mentioned, served in the Civil War. They were both Jewish. There were 8,000 soldiers who served in the Civil War. Also, their story has never been written. No one thinks of Jewish men joining the Civil War, troops at that time. And my friend was a literature major at Harvard, is now head of diversity inclusion at a global law firm. And for years, I've been having this idea of writing a book, also including, a Black perspective of the colored troops. And I wanted her to write it with me. And I called her and I said, we need to do this now. Like, watching what happened with George Floyd was like this call to arms to show that we have to end this blatant hatred and racism. As you said, it was watching a live murder on like when you saw it, that's what it was. So for us, it was this sense like, let's now or never, and we're not going to remain silent. We're going to write something for us. Also a sense of legacy, history, and, for us to bridge sort of a cultural and, historical divide, was so important. But that moment in history, you cannot remain silent. It was.
Thank you. That's how I feel.
No.
You cannot remain silent. And, journalists who remained silent, by the way, during the Holocaust, shame on them, because people were being put into ovens, and 6 million plus souls later. So where was the press? I ask. Where was the press? Why weren't?
And also what I said, today I was reading this article about the Black troops that liberated Dachau and Buchenwald, that there is testimony from Jewish prisoners saying that they remember these men coming and offering them their hand and saying, I will help you, and having tears in their eyes when they saw another race being treated in such a horrible, hateful way, that there was this moment of unity of how can hatred do this?
Yeah.
No one knows this. And it's to me incredible. Like, just and so unjust and so wrong. And what I'd love to ask in my next question is that I know that you go into schools and you talk about your children's book series to make sure that children know about history and know that this incredible, initiative to fight for emancipation and to fight to end for slavery, that Black children, all children, know about this, not just Black children. So how do you feel that this is one of the most rewarding things that you do, educating a whole new generation of children so that they know history completely? I mean, I'm so interested to hear about your experience going into schools and talking about your young adult books.
Yeah, thank you for that question as well, because visiting schools on a regular basis is without question the most rewarding experience of my life. Because it's like I'm talking to my 13-year-old self, my 8-year-old self, and sharing the story that no one told me. And rather than being angry about what I didn't learn back then, I am paying it forward. And I'm proud for the opportunity. So I have been to countless schools, thousands. Multiply that by hundreds of students, and we're talking hundreds of thousands of students from here to California, from Chicago to Tennessee, where my grandfather was enslaved and served. And I can't tell you the privilege, Alyson, to walk into a classroom not as an anchor. That's like on the back. I walk into the classroom as a descendant of a Black Civil War soldier, here to speak on his behalf and present and accounted for to speak for those who never had the chance to share their story and to do PowerPoint presentations showing his enlistment record and allowing students to interpret it for themselves, showing his honorable discharge, and noting that my grandfather, Sandy Wills, received an honorable discharge certificate and could not read a word of it because as a slave, he was not allowed to read or write. And just bringing all of that into the narrative of the Civil War and why it was so critical for the 4 million Black lives at stake in that war. No school is teaching it the way I teach it.
No.
So it's an honor and a privilege. The trajectory of my career has completely changed. And if New York One stopped broadcasting tomorrow, I will never stop walking into schools. This is not broadcasting. I now, Alyson, I now know my purpose. My purpose career-wise is to be a journalist, and that's wonderful, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. But my calling, the reason I was born, and the assignment I was given, that sacred assignment, was to reconnect the pieces of my family's life through slavery and to now, and to share and amplify that message with the world.
Right. And for others to learn, never forget, and to be inspired, and to be
exactly.
It's so inspiring
to do the same. That's a key component.
Right.
To inspire children. I always say, what if I had known about Sandy Wills in the 4th grade? Imagine my hand going up as we are learning about the Civil War.
Right.
But instead, I was taught about Confederate soldiers as if they were heroes. These are the criminals, if you want to break it all down. These men broke the law. Okay? Let's be real clear about that. They didn't do anything right. They fought to keep, I know they had multiple reasons for splitting off and starting their own country, but chief among those reasons was to keep Africans in their clutch forever.
In bondage, yes.
In bondage, in slavery, to continue to will human beings to their families and to use them and strip them of all of their humanity. That was chief among their reasons for fighting in that Civil War. So they were on the wrong side of history. And to teach children about Robert E. Lee and to leave out the Sandy Willses is I'm deeply disappointed that this country allowed that to happen.
For so long, yes.
For so long.
And as we said, it's such an enormous contribution, close to 200,000 Black soldiers joining up at great risk to themselves, for it not to be taught and part of the factual tapestry of history is incredibly unjust and wrong. So you making sure that these children know history fully and the contribution of Black, history and soldiers serving is so important. I think there were many times in your book that I actually started to cry. The parts where it's a very complex book because you have 3 narratives. You have the young daughter who was growing up, your father's story, your father's connection with music and how that influenced you. I know you have a new book coming out in a few days. It's an Amazing Grace. What is the name of the new book?
Yeah, it's called Isn't Her Grace Amazing? The Women Who Changed Gospel Music. I don't know if it will show. No, it won't show. But, I'm very proud of it. It's about Black women in gospel.
Okay, so you have that book, and then you talk about Sandy Wills' story. But the moments that really also connected to me was when you talked about your own journey as a mother. Like, I think there's a chapter where you talk about all the gifts you're giving your your son for Christmas, and this plethora of all these things that you as a successful businesswoman and anchor can give him. And then you imagine your great grandfather being born on a dirt floor of a shack, having nothing, not even having his own name, in a mother who didn't even have the ability to have ownership of her own body. I mean, these terrible things. And then, you juxtapose this with what your life is like now, contrasting with what happened, generations ago. And then of course your father's journey. And there's so much in this book. I mean, it's just incredible and so powerful. And it really made me as not just a novelist who's drawn to the aspect of the Civil War and the different contributions of marginalized voices in history, but this sense of a mother and putting that into perspective when you look back on the past, and how you want to honor them by also shaping the next generation and your children. And you really do that in your book, Cheryl. It's so powerful.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I had to self-publish that book because, I'm a local cable reporter, right? At the time.
No, I'm not going to say right. I'm going to say you're a star.
Well, back 12 years ago when that book came out, I didn't have what I have now. Mm-hmm. And, no one thought much of it. And that's fine. It was my first book. I wasn't a tested writer. I wasn't experienced. And I put my heart on paper the best way I could. And I had those running themes, as you know, so beautifully noted, through every chapter. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure an experienced novelist and writer like yourself may have constructed it differently, but it's imperfectly me. And
I don't think it's imperfect.
It's a love letter to every person in my family who died in anonymity. Mm-hmm. And I learned so much from writing that book. And, the books I write now, I have more support. This current book, Isn't Her Grace Amazing, is with HarperCollins, Mm-hmm. So I have a whole army of editors and all kinds of people now.
The machine behind you now.
But I didn't have that when I wrote Die Free. Mm-hmm. But that will always be my favorite book because I put my heart on paper and I put my rage on paper. I put my rage on paper. And, it was a love letter to my father and everyone that's connected to me through DNA. So I'm so glad you were able to see where I was going.
I absolutely saw it. And, my great uncle Jacob Kling was a musician in the Civil War. He enlisted in the regiment in New York and enlisted as a musician. Wow. And so reading your book, I mean, first of all, I should tell how I found out about your book. The Women's Forum of New York had done like a LinkedIn profile, like highlighting you and your book. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my God, I have to read this book. I mean, my book is finished. I wish it wasn't finished because I probably would have wanted to
yeah, exactly. I wish it wasn't finished.
I wanted to meet you before we finished it. So I bought it truly because I wanted to, learn more about your family's history, your journey to learn more. But there was also, when I read it, this sort of unexpected connection with the music aspect, about how music has run through your family for generations, as it has mine. And then knowing that you have this new book coming out, isn't she amazing, with gospel music. So this, music must be very important to your own family as well. I mean, your father, if I'm right, he played the guitar, right? He was, so can you tell us, I mean, are you musical? Do you do that in your spare time?
I missed the music train when they were handing it out. I got a lot of gifts, but music wasn't one of them. I think it was. I took piano lessons my entire childhood, but I just couldn't pick it up. My family is packed with pianists and guitarists. And speaking of musicians during the Civil War, I have constantly received more documents about Sandy Wills, the Civil War soldier. And it said he too was a musician, which shocked me.
Oh my God.
And the beautiful thing about when you're doing genealogy, it never stops. You don't know what you're going to find or when. And this document came 5 years after I found him. And it said he was a musician. I was stunned.
Now, this is just another coincidence with us. That's really kind of
We
uncanny.
are friends for life. I'm
Yeah.
telling you, we are connected. We are kindred spirits.
Mhm.
So it doesn't indicate what instrument he played,
Mm-hmm.
but I wouldn't be surprised if there is a picture of Black men in the Civil War with guitars, which I just think is so precious. It wouldn't surprise me if he played the guitar because it's such a strong gift that throughout our family tree. But whatever instrument he played, he was clearly part of the musician band
Right.
in the Civil War, the 4th Heavy Field Artillery. So really honored to know that there's so many musicians in my family. And I love that aspect because it goes all the way back to the 19th century.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so last question of the day. What is some advice that you would give aspiring entrepreneurs or women looking to change their career paths? Do you have anything to share?
Absolutely. So I'm also the president and CEO of Wills Publishing and Productions, LLC. It was born out of this whole project. And that business is 10 years old. And it's about to morph into, I'm about to start the Sandy and Emma Wills Foundation. Yes, yes. So I would say that there is nothing like a woman owning her own business. That's why I joined the Women's Forum, to collaborate with extraordinary women like yourself, Alyson, and to learn from so many extraordinary members of this organization. I think it is so key that we realize our grandmother's dreams. As we all know, women were, frankly, just a notch above being enslaved. They couldn't vote. When this country was born, women had no rights. They were their husband's property. So they were just a notch above being enslaved. They didn't even own their children. The men owned the children. And I'm not disparaging them, but women 100 years ago, actually, 100 years ago, let's say, they would actually wipe out their whole name and say they were married to, John Doe. They became Mrs. John Doe. And I think that as empowered women today, we understand what was behind that. Wash your whole, you're now my property. That's really powerful. And that went on for generations, And so knowing the history, women not being able to vote and all of that, not being allowed to own property, I think it's so important that we, in honor of our great grandmothers and so forth that went through that we own our business, own our homes, own our own lives, and chart our own course. I think it is imperative. Even if you work for a company, which I do, it is transformative to have your own business on the side. Just so you can always say, well, I own this. I may work for X, Y, and Z company, but I still have ownership over something. I think being tethered to a company where they can, drag you here or there and not having something to claim as your own, it's something to think about. I'm very proud to be a member of the Women's Forum because they give you the tools. Join the boards, to start your own business, to collaborate with other women who have done extraordinary things. And it's not impossible. You just have to take the first step. Get that LLC and, get the accountant. That's what I did. I knew nothing about this. I was an employee forever, but I got the LLC. Then I hired an accountant. And then I have one employee. And we have done a really good job over the last 10 years. So
that's
I think
wonderful.
Being an entrepreneur is key.
That's
and
wonderful.
My business is called Wills Publishing and Productions.
Okay, so that's wonderful. So this has been such an honor to talk with you, to learn more about your journey as an anchor woman to author, and as also being a mentor yourself to a whole generation of young students, and for also making sure we don't forget important history and contributions in history. So thank you so much, Cheryl. And I hope the members of the forum who listen to our dialogue will be as enriched as I feel.
Thank you. And an honor again to speak to a global best-selling author. I look forward to having you on my show. I'm excited to draw out the incredible narratives that you are now about to amplify to the world about the Civil War on behalf of your uncles. The Jewish involvement in the Civil War is another story that's just been erased.
Yes. It's been not even a footnote. No one
Not
has
footnote.
not even
Not
a footnote.
even a footnote. And it's
Right.
a tragedy. And you too are going to right an historic wrong. So I look forward to having you on my show to talk about that. And I want to thank you for these thoughtful questions. And it's just wonderful being in conversation with you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And a big shout out to our behind the scenes Naja at the Women's Forum, who also helped coordinate everything. Thank you.
Thanks, Naja.